I will be starting off by reading from one of my favorite book series, Harry Potter. Harry Potter was banned in many schools because it promoted witchcraft and teaching students how to conjure evil spirits. Or if you're one woman that I know, she banned it for her kids because she thought that Harry's disobedience from his parents would be a bad influence on her kids. So, multiple reasons. I'll be starting right after Hagrid introduces himself to Harry. The giant took a gulp of tea and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Call me Hagrid," he said. "Everyone does. And like I told you, I'm keeper of keys at Hogwarts. You'll know all about Hogwarts, of course." No," said Harry. Hagrid was shocked. "Sorry," Harry said quickly. "Sorry?" barked Hagrid, turning to stare at the Dursleys, who shrank back into the shadows. "It's them that should be sorry. I know you weren't getting your letters, but I never thought you wouldn't know about Hogwarts for crying out loud. Did you ever wonder where your parents learned it all?" "All what?" asked Harry. "All what?" Hagrid thundered. "Now just wait a second." He leapt to his feet. In his anger, he seemed to fill the whole hut. The Dursleys were cowering against the wall. "Do you mean to tell me," he growled at the Dursleys, "that this boy knows nothing about anything?" Harry thought this was going a bit far. He had been to school, and after all, his marks weren't bad. "I know some things," he said. "I can, do math and stuff." But Hagrid simply waved his hand and said, "About our world. I mean, your world, my world, your parents' world." "What world?" Hagrid looked as if he was about to explode. "Dursley," he boomed. Uncle Vernon, who had gone quite pale, whispered something that sounded like "libble, libble." Hagrid stared wildly at Harry. "But you must know about your mom and dad," he said. "I mean, they were famous. You're famous." "What? My mom and dad weren't famous, were they?" You don't know. Hagrid ran his fingers through his hair, fixing Harry with a bewildered stare. "You don't know what you are?" he said finally. Uncle Vernon suddenly found his voice. "Stop," he commanded. "Stop right there, sir. I forbid you to tell the boy anything." A braver man than Vernon Dursley would have quelled under the furious look Hagrid now gave him. Hagrid spoke, as if every syllable trembled with rage. You never told him what was in the letter Dumbledore left for him? I was there. I saw Dumbledore leave it, Dursley. And you kept it from him all these years?" "Kept what from me?" Harry said eagerly. "Stop, I forbid you," yelled Uncle Vernon in a panic. Aunt Petunia gave a gasp of horror. "I'll go boil your heads, both of you," said Hagrid. "Harry, you're a wizard." There was silence inside the hut. Only the sea and the whistling wind could be heard. "I'm a what?" gasped Harry. "A wizard, of course," said Hagrid, sitting back down on the sofa, which groaned and sank even lower. "And a thumping good one, I'd say, once you've been trained up a bit. With a mom and dad like yours, what else could you be? And I reckon it's about time you read your letter." Harry stretched out his hand at last to take the yellowish envelope and addressed in emerald green to Mr. H. Potter, the floor, hut on the rock, the sea. He pulled up the letter and read, "Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Headmaster Albus Dumbledore. Order of Merlin, First Class, Grand Sorcerer, Chief Warlock, Supreme Muggle, International Confederation of Witches. Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted into the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find enclosed a list of all necessary books and equipment. Term begins on September 1st. We await your owl by no later than July 31st. Yours sincerely, Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress." So, next, I believe Dr. Lee or someone from the library will be explaining the top reasons why the books are banned challenge. Thank you.
Or you can look at the picture.
Or that.
I guess I can do that. So I thought this was a piece of an infographic. I believe it was the American Libraries Association or something related to them. And these are the top reasons why books are challenged. So offensive language, sexual content, which both of those are unsuitable for age groups. Other objections are violence, homosexuality, religious viewpoints, the occult or Satanism, which is what Harry Potter is considered, portrayal of Marxism or anything political, and a lot of books are banned in their own countries because of the politics. There's also nudity, or again, the sexual content, racism, drugs and alcohol, as well as smoking, so those are bad habits that I hope children will not pick up, and also anything that is anti-family.
So I am a librarian and also a nerd. So instead of like actually reading from books, I'm going to talk a little about a few of my favorite banned books in the context of the Streisand effect. So that obviously is Barbra Streisand, and she is a singer who originated the idea of the Streisand effect. In 2003, there was an aerial survey that was like mapping the California coastline, and they took hundreds of thousands of photos, I think. One photo published among these many photos on the internet depicted her house, and she found out and she didn't like it, so she asked for them to take down the photo. The news got wind of this, and the photo began to disseminate widely across the internet, and to this day, I think that photo has been seen hundreds of thousands of times, all because she wanted it taken down. So from that comes the idea of the Streisand effect, which is basically the idea that when you try to ban something, when you try to make it unavailable to the public, it's going to become more popular, because human nature is, people are curious. When something is held from them, they automatically want to go see it. I know I experience that all the time, and I'm sure that I'm not alone in that. If somebody tries to withhold a piece of knowledge from me, that makes me want it that much more intensely. And I think, from my professional perspective, I think that's one reason, sociologically, that banning books is just, it's a dumb idea. So I'm going to talk about 3 of my favorite banned books, starting with Ulysses, 1922. It was banned from the US because one specific chapter, for those who are curious, it's chapter 13, where dirty things happen on a beach. The publisher of Ulysses in the US arranged for one copy of the French edition to get imported, kind of as a censorship test, so they knew that it was going to cause intense controversy as soon as it hit our shores. That instigated a legal case, and ultimately Judge John Woolsey wrote this very eloquent legal decision, which allowed it to come into the US. And one interesting thing about that legal decision is that after it came out, it got published as part of every edition of Ulysses. So it's probably the most published legal decision of the 20th century. That's kind of interesting. In this decision, Woolsey wrote this: whilst in many places the effect of Ulysses on the reader undoubtedly is somewhat emetic, nowhere does it tend to be an aphrodisiac. So basically he's saying that the book may inspire disgust in some places. It's a very realistic novel about people's bodies and their behavior and their thoughts and ideas, but the book is not infernal. So that sort of drew the distinction between the idea of a book depicting realistic human lives and books as pornography, books intended to do nothing but stimulate. So that's Ulysses, and that's sort of one of the groundbreaking censorship cases of the 20th century. And honestly, you'd think people would learn. You'd think that they would get each time trying to ban a book that it's only going to make it more popular, that it's going to add to its reputation, and it's really going to make the book take off in a big way. Because Ulysses is, it's a big, difficult novel, and yet a survey in the late 90s, I think, found that it was the best book of the 20th century in the English language. So it went from being this, banned book that caused a lot of, commotion to being considered this cornerstone of modern literature. Along similar lines is Lolita. This one was banned first in a way, in my opinion, through publishers' rejections. I see that sort of thing as sort of the more nebulous form of censorship. When somebody, a publisher, for example, rejects a work of obvious literary merit on the basis of subject matter or other factors, to me it's not quite censorship, but it's kind of in that same ballpark. Publishers who rejected the book are probably kicking themselves to this day because it wound up selling millions of copies, including 100,000 copies in its first 3 weeks. And if you know anything about what happens in Lolita, that's really saying something, that this book was able to sell that many copies in the 1950s when it finally got published and sort of made it big. Lolita first got published via a semi-pornographic publisher in France, Olympia Press. A review from the acclaimed English novelist Graham Greene sort of drew attention to it in Europe and in the United States. And then the UK and France banned the book for several years. It didn't have those kinds of problems with censorship in the US. It was only in Europe that it had these issues. But one interesting thing is that this controversy from overseas sort of kickstarted its reputation in the US. And now Lolita is a household name. And it went from having this reputation as being this, filthy bit of European trash abroad to again becoming seen as one of the great novels of the 20th century. And if you go back and look at some of the ads from that era, they capitalized on the controversy around that book. It was this book by this Russian novelist living in America who nobody really knew about. But as soon as these censorship efforts began in Europe, that was perfect marketing material for this book. So, again, banning a book makes people want to read it more. It gives it a little bit of this air of mystery and temptation that otherwise it might not have, because otherwise nobody would know about it. Yeah.
Can you speak more to that marketing specifically regarding the movie when it came out?
Yes, when the movie came out in 1962, they actually capitalized on the book's reputation. They played an ad with outraged voices proclaiming, how did they ever make a movie with Lolita? So again, it was the controversy that sort of led to this book's infamy, and again, its reputation. So I don't think it would be nearly as famous if it hadn't been for this controversy in the first place. And then last but not least is Naked Lunch, which I'm holding sideways because it has this kind of eye-catching cover. Naked Lunch was published originally in 1959 by Olympia Press, the same publishing house that put Lolita out. And that publisher in France, Olympia Press, run by Maurice Strodius, wound up being fined and prevented from publishing for a while. I think they fined him in like the dozens of thousands of pounds. So it was a lot. It was an enormous fine. They obviously saw this as like serious business that he was publishing this illicit novel. Sections of Naked Lunch got published in the student journal at the University of Chicago, and that publication of this book, before the book was even officially out, led to the university's administration trying to censor the journal, and most of the editors of the journal resigned in protest. So again, before it was even a book, it was sort of causing controversy. It was banned in Boston, where, by the way, many other famous books were banned. I think that's sort of an interesting thing. That's also sort of this minor marketing of sort of banned books. You hear that they were banned in Boston, and that's meant to sort of convey that these books have sort of this special air of the saucy and illicit about them. During the trial, deciding whether or not it was okay to publish Naked Lunch, the publisher of Grove Press, its American publisher, solicited testimony from a number of famous authors. Best-selling novelist Norman Mailer said this in his testimony about this book. William S. Burroughs has extraordinary talent. Possibly he is the most talented writer in America. Poet Allen Ginsberg said, there is a great deal of very pure language and pure poetry in this book. That is as great as any poetry being written in America, in my opinion. You can't find these kinds of reviews. And it's in part due to this kind of testimony from the author's peers that the novel's reputation grew to the point that it's another household name. On the face of it, it's a controversial book. It's full of sex and drug abuse and anti-authority ideas, but it's a difficult novel to read. But people read it because of this controversy. So to sum up, I have to say that myself, I might not have ever read these books if it hadn't been for this air of sinister mystery and scandal around them. It was the fact that people didn't want others reading these books that made me want to read them in the first place. It was obvious that books that cause this much emotion must be interesting, and they are. I think banned books usually are pretty interesting because if somebody's writing a book that's so controversial as to draw that kind of protest against it, odds are pretty good that it's going to have some challenging ideas, some challenging subject matter. It's going to be the sort of book that moves your mind into new places. As a librarian, obviously I have professional objections to censorship. That kind of goes without saying. But again, on a sociological level, apart from issues of intellectual freedom, going back to the Streisand effect, any effort to cover something up is just going to invite more interest in it. And I, again, maintain that's human nature. So of all the good reasons not to censor books or anything else, this, I think, is another reason. It's just kind of common sense. If you try to keep something from people, they're just going to go after it that much more. And I think, in the scheme of history, that cycle just keeps repeating itself. So if ever you're in the position to ban something, don't do it. I know you're innocent for a reason, because you're against censorship, but new situations come up all the time, and you never know what controversial topic today is going to be sort of tomorrow's that you're going to utter. So,
Yeah.
Thanks.
Can you tell them why the Bible gets made? All right.
Well, okay, so I'm going to be reading about the Bible, and I feel like the reason why it got me is it covers a lot of controversial topics. It's like adultery, slavery, power, it even talks about the end of time, all the terrible things that can happen. And I feel like it's just a list of the people we don't want to talk about on our face. So the part that I'm going to read out of the Bible is Song of Solomon. It has a lot of erotic
poetry about a man and woman. So it has to do with the one about sexuality. And I'm going to read like chapter 7. How beautiful are thy feet with shoes, O princess daughter. The joints of thy thighs are like jewels, and the work of the hands of a cunning workman. Thy navel is round goblet which wanteth not liquor, thy belly like a heap of wheat set about with lilies. Thy two breasts are like two young roes that are twins. Thy neck is like a tower of ivory, thine eyes like the fishbowl of Hezebon by the gate of Bath. Thy nose is as the tower of Lebanon, which looketh toward Damascus. Thine head upon thee is like Carmel, and the hair of thine head like purple, and the king is held in the galleries. How fair and how pleasant art thou, O love for delights! Thus thy stature is like to a palm tree, and thy breasts to clusters of grapes. I said, I will go to the palm tree, and I will take a hold of the boughs thereof. Now also thy breasts shall be clusters of the vine, and the smell of thy nose like apples, and the roof of thy mouth like the best wine from my beloved, that goeth down sweetly, causing the lips of those that are asleep to speak. I am my beloved's, and his desire is toward me. Come, my beloved, let us go forth into the field, let us lodge in the villages. Let us get up early to the vineyards, let us see if the vine flourish, whether the tender grape appear, and the pomegranates bud forth, and there I will give my loves. The mandrakes give a smell, and our gates are all manner of pleasant fruits, new and old, which I have laid of thee, O my beloved.
Okay, so I am going to be talking to you guys about the Quran, which I actually have with me here. The Quran is written in Arabic. If you guys don't know, the Quran is the holy book of Muslims, aka myself. And I'm actually just gonna, it's banned in a couple countries because, well, it's banned in China for sure, because China's a communist country and they don't want anything to do with religion. Also, it's starting to become banned in other places as well, like for the same reasons as the Bible. They're controversial, goes against what the government wants you to know, what the government wants you to learn, etc. So actually, I have some verses here. I'm going to read them in Arabic, and then I will translate. Most of the verses have to do with science and how we came about and all that stuff. So the first one I will be reading is from the chapter called Al-Anbiya, which means the prophets. And this is verse 21. I didn't find it. Okay, there it is. يسبحون الليل والنهار لا يفترون أم اتخذوا آلهة من الأرض هم ينشرون لو كان فيهما آلهة إلا الله فسدتا فسبحان الله رب العرش عما يصفون. So he is the one who created the night, day, sun, and moon. Each one is traveling in an orbit with its own motion. So it's crazy to me how a book that was revealed thousands of years ago, or over 1,400 years ago, knows this, and this is before people actually knew about science, planets, and people thought the Earth was flat. So another one is the creation of humans. So this chapter is called the Believers. So I'm going to be starting from verse 12. And that is وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ سُلَالَةٍ مِنْ طِينٍ ثُمَّ جَعَلْنَاهُ نُطْفَةً فِي قَرَارٍ مَكِينٍ ثُمَّ خَلَقْنَا النُّطْفَةَ عَلَقَةً فَخَلَقْنَا الْعَلَقَةَ مُضْغَةً فَخَلَقْنَا المضغة عظاما فكسونا العظام لحما ثم أنشأناه خلقا آخر فتبارك الله أحسن الخالقين. So this is saying that we created man from an extract of clay, then place each human as a sperm drop in a secure place. And then I have the rest of my phone because I couldn't fit on one note card. And then it says, that then we made this drop into a clot, then we made this clot into a lump, and then we made the lump into bones, and then we clothed the bones with flesh, and then we caused it to grow into another creation. Thus, the most blessed is Allah, the best of all those that create. So Allah is actually the word for God in Arabic. So whenever we say, if you hear any Arab, not necessarily Muslim, if you hear them say Allah, they're not referring to just, oh, a Muslim God. No, they're referring to God in general. So actually, Arab Christians actually refer to God as Allah. A lot of people don't know that. And then this is also, this is from another chapter, which is called Surat Nuh. Nuh is the story of Noah. So this is 15 and 16, and this is going to be talking about the creation of, like, not the creation, but like the sun and the moon and how they're different. People used to believe that the sun and the moon used to have their own light, like the moon had its own light, but that's not true. I mean, astrologists figured out that the moon is reflecting off the sun, and that was actually written here. Anyway, so it goes, قال نوح ربي إنهم عصوني واتبعوا من لم يزده ماله وولده إلا خسارة ومكروا مكرا كبارا وقالوا لا تذرن آلهتكم ولا تذرن ودا ولا سواعا ولا يغوث ولا يعوق ونسرا وقد أضلوا كثيرا ولا تزيد الظالمين إلا ضلالا. And then also, ألم تروا كيف خلق الله سبع سماوات طباقا وجعل القمر فيهن نورا وجعل الشمس سراجا والله أنبتكم من الأرض نباتا. So it says, did you see how Allah created 7 heavens, one above the other, and made in them the moon a light and the sun a lamp? So the moon is an inert body in which it reflects light, whereas the sun is a celestial body in a state of permanent combustion, producing both light and heat. And then I just have this one other story. It doesn't have to do with science, but it's talking about how somebody should be gracious and not be stingy. And this one, I'm going to read it a little bit different because I've listened to the way somebody reads this, and I really like the way they say it. So it starts off as, واضرب لهم مثل الرجلين جعلنا لأحدهما جنتين من أعناب وحففناهما بنخل وجعلنا بينهما زرعا كلتا الجنتين آتت أكلها ولم تظلم منه شيئا وفجرنا خلالهما نهرا وكان له ثمر فقال لصاحبه وهو يحاوره أنا أكثر منك مالا وأعز نفرا ودخل جنته وهو ظالم لنفسه قال ما أظن أن تبيد هذه أبدا وما أظن الساعة قائمة ولئن رددت إلى ربي لأجدن خيرا منها منقلبا قال له صاحبه وهو يحاوره أكفرت بالذي خلقك من تراب ثم من نطفة ثم سواك رجلا لكن هو الله ربي ولا أشرك بربي أحدا ولولا إذ دخلت جنتك قلت ما شاء الله لا قوة إلا بالله إن ترني أنا أقل منك مالا وولدا فعسى ربي أن يؤتيني خيرا من جنتك ويرسل عليها حسبانا من السماء فتصبح صعيدا زلقا أو يصبح ماؤها غورا فلن تستطيع له طلبا وأحيط بثمره فأصبح يقلب كفيه على ما أنفق فيها وهي خاوية على عروشها ويقول يا ليتني لم أشرك بربي أحدا. Okay, I was really nervous, I'm sorry, I have to pause a little bit. But, so what that means is that right here, and to present to them an example of 2 men. We granted one of them 2 gardens of grapevines, and we bordered them with palm trees and placed between them fields of crops. Each of the 2 gardens produced its fruit and did not fall short thereof anything. And we caused to gush forth within them a river, So it's a beautiful garden, a huge garden, and it's beautiful, and it's owned by one of these men. And then this guy, he had very many fruit, and he said to this other man while he was conversing with him, "I'm greater than you in wealth, and mightier than you in numbers of men." Yeah. And then he entered his garden, and he was unjust to himself, and he said, "I don't think that this will ever perish. My garden will never go away." And then, and he said, "I also don't think that the hour will come." We believe in the hour of resurrection, where like people will come back from the death and they will be questioned by God. So the day of judgment, I'm pretty sure Christians have the same concept. And so he said, I don't believe in the day of judgment, and I also feel like even if it is true that I'm gonna have better than this in my afterlife. And so his companion said to him while they were talking to each other, "Have you disbelieved in He who created you from dust and then from sperm and then proportioned you as a man? But as for me, Allah is my Lord, and I do not associate with my Lord anyone." And why did you, when you entered your garden, not say, like, "Oh, thank God for what God has given me"? Why did you not say that there is no power except in Allah? Although you see me less than you in wealth and children, I am more than you. Like, I'm more in religion and faith, pretty much. And then he said, "It may be that my Lord will give me something better than your garden, and will send upon it a calamity from the sky, and will become some smooth and dusty ground. Or its water will become sunken into the earth, so you would never be able to seek it." And so then this other guy, because he started to think very highly of himself and that thought, that I will always have this, God took that away from him, and he destroyed his garden, and he destroyed all of his crops, and pretty much ruined everything. And then at the end, he says, "Oh my gosh, God forgive me for what I have done, for what I have said, and I regret it now, but now it's too late." So, yeah, sorry, that was all. I'm so nervous to read in Arabic, you guys. That was hard. I've never done that in front of anybody before.
He's right after you. Okay.
Hi. Thank you, Dr. Lee, for having me. I'm going to be reading excerpts from one of the seminal novels in African literature written by the late Chinua Achebe from Nigeria. This was written in 1958, and if you put that in the context of colonialism in Africa, shortly before Nigeria, his country, gained its independence on October 1st, 1960. And in this book, he tries to actually depict the cultural realities of a fictional tribe in his own country, to actually extol the values of his culture prior to European invasion, so as to speak, and also try to emphasize the negative effects that European colonialism had on the purity, if you will, of the culture of his tribe. Do you want me to read just one chapter? Or
Up to you.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe just the first.
So it's called Things Fall Apart, and Chinua Achebe is really he was one of the acclaimed novelists of his time. So he was one of the leaders of that independence movement. I mean, from a literature standpoint in Africa. Here it goes. Okonkwo, which is the lead, the protagonist in this novel, was well known throughout the 9 villages and even beyond. His fame rested on solid personal achievements. As a young man of 18, he had brought honor to his village by throwing Amalinzi, the cat. Amalinzi was the great wrestler who for 7 years was unbeaten. From Umofia to Baino, he was called a cat because his back would never touch the earth. It was this man that Okonkwo threw in a fight, which the old man agreed was one of the fiercest, since the founder of the town engaged a spirit of the wild for 7 days and 7 nights. The drums beat and the flutes sang, and the spectators held their breath. Amalinzi was a wily craftsman, but Okonkwo was as slippery as a fish in water. Every nerve and every muscle stood out on their arms, on their backs, on their thighs, and one almost hurt them stretching to breaking point. In the end, Okonkwo threw the cat. That was many years ago, 20 years or more, and during this time, Okonkwo's fame had grown like a bush fire in the Harmattan. He was tall and huge, and his bushy eyebrows and white nose gave him a very severe look. He breathed heavily, and it was said that when he slept, his wives and children in their houses could hear him breathe. When he walked, his heels hardly touched the ground, and he seemed to walk on springs, as if he was going to pounce on somebody. And he did pounce on people quite often. He had a slight stammer, and whenever he was angry and could not get his words out quickly enough, he would use his fist. He had no patience with unsuccessful men. He had had no patience with his father. Unoka, for that was his father's name, had died 10 years ago. In his day, he was lazy and improvident and was quite incapable of thinking about tomorrow. If any money came his way, and he seldom did, he immediately bought gourds of palm wine, called round his neighbors, and made merry. He always said that whenever he saw a dead man's mouth, he saw the folly of not eating what one had in one's lifetime. Unoka was, of course, a debtor, and he owed every neighbor some money, from a few calories to quite substantial amounts. He was tall, but very thin, and had a slight stoop. He wore a haggard and mournful look, except when he was drinking or playing on his flute. He was very good on his flute, and his happiest moments were the 2 or 3 moons after the harvest, when the village musicians brought down their instruments, hung above the fireplace. Unoka would play with them, his face beaming with blessedness and peace. Sometimes another village would ask Unoka's band and their dancing egugu to come and stay with them and teach them their tunes. They would go to such hosts for as long as 3 or 4 markets, making music and feasting. Unoka loved the good fare and the good fellowship, and he loved his season of the year when the rains had stopped and the sun rose every morning with dazzling beauty. And it was not too hot either, because the cold and dry Harmattan rain was blowing down from the north. Some years the Harmattan was very severe, and the dense haze hung on the atmosphere. Old men and children would then sit round log fires, warming their bodies. Unoka loved it all, and he loved the first kites that returned with the dry season. And the children would sing songs of welcome to them. He would remember his own childhood, how he had often wandered around looking for a kite, sailing leisurely the blue sky. As soon as he found one, he would sing with his whole being, welcoming it back from its long, long journey, and asking if it had brought home any length of cloth. That was years ago when he was young. Yunoka, the grown-up, was a failure. He was poor, and his wife and children had barely enough to eat. People laughed at him because he was a loafer, and they swore never to lend him any more money because he never paid back. But Yunoka was such a man that he always succeeded in borrowing more and piling up his debts. One day, a neighbor called Okoye came in to see him. He was reclining on a mud bed in his hut, playing on the flute. He immediately rose and shook hands with Okoye, who then unrolled the goat skin which he carried under his arm and sat down. Yunoka went into an inner room and soon returned with a small wooden disc containing a kola nut, some alligator pepper, and a lump of white chalk. "I have kola," he announced when he sat down and passed the disc over to his guest. "Thank you. He who brings kola brings life, but I think you ought to break it," replied Okoye, passing back the disc. "No, it is for you, I think." And they argued like this for a few moments before Yunoka accepted the honor of breaking the kola. Okoye, meanwhile, took the lump of chalk, drew some lines on the floor, and then painted his big toe. As he broke the kola, Yunoka prayed to their ancestors for life and health and for protection against their enemies. When they had eaten, they talked about many things, about the heavy rains which were drowning the yams, about the next ancestral feast, and about the impending war with the village of Baino. Yunoka was never happy when it came to wars. He was, in fact, a coward and could not bear the sight of blood. And so he changed the subject and talked about music, and his face beamed. He could hear in his mind's ear the blood-stirring and intricate rhythms of the ikwe and the udu and the ogini, and he could hear his own flute weaving in and out of them, decorating them with a colorful and plaintive tune. The total effect was gay and brisk, but if one picked out the flute as it went up and down and then broke up into short snatches, one saw that there was sorrow and grief there. Okoye was also a musician. He played on the ogili, but he was not a failure like Yunoka. He had a large barn full of yams, and he had 3 wives. And now he was going to take the Idimili title, the 3rd highest in the land. It was a very expensive ceremony, and he was gathering all his resources together. That was, in fact, the reason why he had come to see Yunoka. He cleared his throat and began. "Thank you for the kola. You may have heard of the title I intend to take shortly." Having spoken plainly so far, Okoye said the next half a dozen sentences in Proverbs. Among the Igbo, the art of conversation is regarded very highly, and Proverbs are the palm oil with which words are eaten. Okoye was a great talker, and he spoke for a long time, skirting around the subject, and then hitting it finally. In short, he was asking Yunoka to return the 200 cowries he had borrowed from him more than 2 years before. As soon as Yunoka understood what his friend was driving at, he burst out laughing. He laughed loud and long, and his voice rang out clear as the ogini, and tears stood in his eyes. His visitor was amazed and sat speechless. At the end, Yunoka was able to give an answer between fresh outbursts of mirth. "Look at that wall," he said, pointing at the far wall of his hut, which was rubbed with red earth so that it shone. "Look at those lines of chalk, and Okoye saw groups of short, perpendicular lines drawn in chalk. There were 5 groups, and the smallest group had 10 lines. Unoka had a sense of the dramatic, and so he allowed a pause, in which he took a pinch of snuff and sneezed noisily, and then he continued. Each group there represents a debt to someone, and each stroke is 100 calories. You see, I owe that man 1,000 calories, but he has not come to wake me up in the morning for it. I shall pay you, but not today. Our elders said that the sun will shine on those who stand before it. Who stand before it shines on those who kneel under them. I shall pay my big debts first. And he took another pinch of snuff, as if that was paying the big debts first. Okoye rolled his goat skin and departed. When Unoka died, he had taken no title at all, and he was heavily in debt. Any wonder, then, that his son, Okonkwo, was ashamed of him? Fortunately, among these people, a man was judged according to his worth, and not according to the worth of his father. Okonkwo was clearly cut out for great things. He was still young, but he had won fame as the greatest wrestler in the 9 villages. He was a wealthy farmer and had 2 barns full of yams, and had just married his 3rd wife. To crown it all, he had taken 2 titles and had shown incredible prowess in 2 intertribal wars. And so, although Okonkwo was still young, he was already one of the greatest men of his time. Age was respected among his people, but achievement was revered. As the elders said, if a child washed his hands, he could eat with kings. Okonkwo had clearly washed his hands, and so he ate with kings and elders. Okonkwo had clearly washed his hands, and so, no, I just repeated myself here. And that was how he came to look after the doomed lad who was sacrificed to the village of Umofia by their neighbors to avoid war and bloodshed. The ill-fated lad was called Ikemefuna. That's the end of chapter 1. So you can see it's a way of describing the daily occurrences in that tribe. It was a fictional tribe, but throughout, the plot here is actually to showcase how life was somewhat enjoyable before the arrival of those colonial powers. Yes. So, yes.
What languages do you speak?
Yeah, the book?
You.
Me? Well, French, then my tribal language, and then English.
Nice. Where's your tribal language from? Like what?
Cameroon.
Nice.
Yes. Good.
Yes.
All right.
Okay, I'll be reading from I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and it's by Maya Angelou, published in 1969. The title is found objectionable because of she recounts a rape, and then there's also drug use, and so some deem that objectionable. So I'll be reading from chapter 12, which is a particularly graphic scene. But it chronicles her life, and it's important that her story remain told. Actually, it's chapter 11. I had decided that St. Louis was a foreign country. I would never get used to the scurrying sounds of flushing toilets, or the packaged foods, or doorbells, or the noise of cars and trains and buses that crashed through the walls or slipped under the doors. In my mind, I only stayed in St. Louis for a few weeks. As quickly as I understood that I had not reached home, I sneaked away to Robin Hood's forest and the caves of Aleut, where all reality was unreal, and even that changed every day. I carried the same shield that I had used in Stamps. I didn't come to stay. Mother was competent in providing for us, even if that meant getting someone to even furnish the provisions. Although she was a nurse, she never worked at her profession while we were with her. Mr. Freeman brought in the necessities, and she earned extra money cutting poker games in gambling parlors. The straight 8-to-5 world simply didn't have enough glamour for her, and it was 20 years later that I first saw her in a nurse's uniform. Mr. Freeman was a foreman in the Southern Pacific Yards and came home late sometimes, after Mother had gone out. He took his dinner off the stove, where she had carefully covered it, and which she had admonished us not to bother. He ate quickly in the kitchen while Bailey and I read separately and greedily our own Street and Smith Pulp magazine. Now that we had spending money, we bought the illustrated paperbacks with their gaudy pictures. When Mother was away, we were put on an honor system. We had to finish our homework, eat dinner, wash the dishes before we could read or listen to The Lone Ranger, Crime Busters, or The Shadow. Mr. Freeman moved gracefully, like a big brown bear, and seldom spoke to us. He simply waited for Mother and put his whole self into the waiting. He never read the paper or patted his foot to the radio. He waited. That was all. If she came home before we went to bed, we saw the man come alive. He would start out of the big chair like a man coming out of sleep, smiling. I would remember then that a few seconds before, I had heard a car door slam, then Mother's footsteps would signal them from the concrete walk. When her key rattled the door, Mr. Freeman would have already asked his habitual question, "Hey, BB, have a good time?" His query would hang in the air while she sprang over to peck him on the lips. Then she turned to Bailey and me with the lipstick kisses. "Haven't you finished your homework?" If we had, and we were just reading, okay, say your prayers and go to bed. If we hadn't, then go to your room and finish. Then say your prayers and go to bed. Mr. Freeman's smile never grew. It stayed at the same intensity. Sometimes Mother would go over and sit on his lap, and the grin on his face looked at us as if it would stay forever. From our rooms, we could hear the glasses clink and the radio turned up. I think she must have danced for him on the good nights, because he couldn't dance. But before I fell asleep, I often heard feet shuffling to dance rhythms. I felt very sorry for Mr. Freeman. I felt as sorry for him as I had for a litter of helpless pigs born in our backyard sty in Arkansas. We fattened the pigs all year long for slaughter on the first good frost. And even as I suffered for the cute little wiggly things, I knew how much I was going to enjoy the fresh sausage and hog's head cheese they could give me only with their deaths. Because of the lurid tales we read and our vivid imaginations and probably memories of our brief but hectic lives, Bailey and I were afflicted, he physically and I mentally. He stuttered, and I sweated through horrifying nightmares. He was constantly told to slow down and start again, and on my particularly bad nights, my mother would take me in to sleep with her in the large bed with Mr. Freeman. Because of a need for stability, children easily become creatures of habit. After the third time in Mother's bed, I thought there was nothing strange about sleeping there. One morning, she got out of bed early for an early errand, and I fell asleep again. But I woke to a pressure, a strange feeling on my left leg. It was too soft to be a hand, and it wasn't the touch of clothes. Whatever it was, I hadn't encountered the sensation in all the years of sleeping with Mama. It didn't move, and I was too startled to. I turned my head a little to the left to see if Mr. Freeman was awake and gone, but his eyes were open, and both hands were above the cover. I knew, as if I had always known, it was his thing on my leg. He said, "Just stay right there, Reedy. I ain't gonna hurt you." I wasn't afraid, A little apprehensive maybe, but not afraid. Of course, I knew that lots of people did it, and that they used their things to accomplish the deed. But no one I knew had ever done it to anybody. Mr. Freeman pulled me to him and put his hand between my legs. He didn't hurt, but Mama had drilled into my head, keep your legs closed and don't let nobody see your pocketbook. Now, I didn't hurt you. Don't get scared. He threw back the blankets, and his thing stood up like a brown ear of corn, and he took my hand and said, "Feel it." It was mushy and squirmy like the inside of a freshly killed chicken. Then he dragged me on top of his chest with his left arm, and his right hand was moving so fast and his heart was beating so hard that I was afraid that he would die. Ghost stories reveal how people who died wouldn't let go of what they were holding. I wondered if Mr. Freeman died holding me, how would I ever get free? Would they have to break his arms to get me loose?
As I was going to search the web yesterday for something to read, I immediately got a message from Professor Lee about if I would like to read fairy tales, and I kind of had a big question mark on my head because I was like, fairy tales, banned? And then, of course, the conversation led into reasons that I actually wasn't really aware of for fairy tales, and having seen this book on my shelf, and with that request, I said, that's perfect timing. So I will read Little Red Riding Hood, and my voice has been kind of dry, so I apologize if my delivery gets a little...
And if you need to jump around because there's class.
Okay, yeah. Once upon a time, there was a dear little girl who was loved by everyone who looked at her, but most of all by her grandmother, and there was nothing that she would not have given to that child. Once she gave her a little cap of red velvet, which suited her so well that she would never wear anything else, so she was always called Little Red Riding Hood. One day her mother said to her, "Come, Little Red, here is a piece of cake and a bottle of wine. Take them to your grandmother. She is ill and weak, and they will do her good. Set out before it gets hot, and when you are going, walk nicely and quietly, and do not run off the path, or you may fall and break the bottle, and then your grandmother will get nothing. And when you go to her room, don't forget to say, 'Good morning,' and don't peep into every corner before you do it." "I will take great care," said Little Red Riding Hood to her mother, and gave her hand on it. The grandmother lived out in the wood, half a league from the village, and just as Little Red Riding Hood entered the wood, a wolf met her. Little Red Riding Hood did not know what a wicked creature he was, and was not at all afraid of him. "Good day, Little Red Riding Hood," he said. "Thank you kindly, wolf. Whither away so early, Little Red Riding Hood?" "To my grandmother's." "What have you got in your apron?" "Cake and wine. Yesterday was baking day, so poor sick grandmother is to have something good to make her stronger." "Where does your grandmother live, Little Red?" "A quarter of a league farther on in the wood. Her house stands under the tree, 3 large oak trees. The nut trees are just below. You surely must know it," replied Little Red Riding Hood. The wolf thought to himself, "What a tender young creature. What a nice plump mouthful. She will get better to eat than the old woman, or she will be better to eat. I must act craftily, so as to catch both." So he walked for a short time by the side of Little Red Riding Hood. Then he said, "See, Little Red, how pretty the flowers are about here. Why do you not look around? I believe, too, that you do not hear how sweetly the little birds are singing. You walk gravely along as if you were going to school, while everything else out here in the wood is merry." Little Red Riding Hood raised her eyes, and when she saw the sunbeams dancing here and there through the trees, and pretty flowers growing everywhere, she thought, "Suppose I take grandmother a fresh nosegay. That would please her too. It is early in the day that I shall still get there in good time." And so she ran from the path into the wood to look for flowers. And whenever she had picked one, she fancied that she saw a still prettier one farther on, and ran after it, and so got deeper and deeper into the wood. Meanwhile, the wolf ran straight to the grandmother's house and knocked at the door. "Who is there?" "Little Red Riding Hood," replied the wolf. "She is bringing cake and wine. Open the door." "Lift the hatch," called out the grandmother. "I am too weak and cannot get up." The wolf lifted the latch. The door flew open, and without saying a word, he went straight into the grandmother's bed and devoured her. Then he put on her clothes, dressed himself in her cap, laid himself in bed, and drew the curtains. Little Red Riding Hood, however, had been running about picking flowers, and when she had gathered so many that she could carry no more, she remembered her grandmother and set out on the way to her. She was surprised to find the cottage door standing open, and when she went into the room, she had such a strange feeling that she said to herself, "How dear, how uneasy I feel today, and at other times I like being with grandmother so much." She called out, "Good morning," but received no answer, so she went to the bed and drew back the curtains. There lay her grandmother with her cap pulled over her face and looking very strange. "Oh, grandmother," she said, "what big ears you have! The better to hear you with, my child," was the reply. "But grandmother, what big eyes you have," she said, "the better to see you with, my dear." "But grandmother, what large hands you have, the better to hug you with." "Oh, but grandmother, what a terrible big mouth you have, the better to eat you with." And scarcely had the wolf said this, than with one bound he was out of bed and swallowed up Red Riding Hood. When the wolf had appeased his appetite, he lay down again in the bed, fell asleep, and began to snore out very loud. The huntsman was just passing the house and thought to himself, "How the old woman is snoring. I must just see if she wants anything." So he went into the room, and when he came to the bed, he saw that the wolf was lying in it. "Do I find thee here, thou old sinner?" said he. "I have long sought thee." Then, just as he was going to fire at him, it occurred to him that the wolf might have devoured the grandmother, and that she might still be saved. So he did not fire, but took a pair of scissors and began to cut the stomach of the sleeping wolf. Then he had made 2 snips. He saw Little Red Riding Hood shining, and then he made 2 snips more, and the little girl sprang out crying, "Ah, how frightened I have been! How dark it was inside the wolf!" And after the aged grandmother came out also, but scarcely able to breathe. Red Riding Hood, however, quickly fetched great stones with which they filled the wolf's body, and when he awoke, he wanted to run away, but the stones were so heavy that he fell down at once, and fell dead. Then all 3 were delighted. The huntsman drew off the wolf's skin and went home with it. The grandmother ate the cake and drank the wine which Red Riding Hood had brought, and revived, but Red Riding Hood thought to herself, "As long as I live, I will never by myself leave the path to run into the wood when my mother has forbidden me to do so." And that's not the ending, but I would like to end it there.
I have it.
Okay, thank you. Like, where'd she go? Okay, thank you, Lisa.
No problem.
Okay, I'm gonna go back home. Sorry, don't look at these. There you go.
Well, I'm going to be reading a chapter from Sherman Alexie's The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. And it's been banned because of alcohol, bullying, sexuality, profanity, and slurs related to homosexuality and mental disability. I'm saying all that, y'all can read it, not. But I'm going to read this right quick. I picked a chapter that's not necessarily full of any of those, but I think it displays the kind of tone of the book really well. So I picked that one. After Mr. P left, I sat on the porch for a long time and thought about my life. What the heck was I supposed to do? I felt like life had just knocked me on my ass. I was so happy when Mom and Dad got home from work. "Hey, little man," Dad said. "Hey, Dad, Mom, Junior, why are you looking so sad?" Mom asked. She knew stuff. I didn't know how to start. So I just started with the biggest question. "Who has the most hope?" I asked. Mom and Dad looked at each other. They studied each other's eyes. You know, like they had antennas and were sending radio signals to each other. And then they both looked back at me. "Come on," I said. "Who has the most hope?" White people, my parents said at the same time. That's exactly what I thought they were going to say, so I said the most surprising thing they'd ever heard from me. I want to transfer schools, I said. You want to go to Hunter's? Mom said. It's another school on the west end of the reservation filled with poor Indians and poor white kids. Yes, there is a place in the world where the white people are poorer than the Indians. No, I said. You want to go to Springdale? Dad asked. It's a school on the reservation border filled with the poorest Indians and the poorer than poorest white kids. Yes, there is a place in the world where the white people are even poorer than you ever thought possible. I want to go to Reardon, he said. Reardon, I said. Reardon is the rich white farm town that sits on the wheat fields exactly 22 miles away from the reservation. And it's a hick town, I suppose, filled with farmers and rednecks and racist cops who stop every Indian that drives through. During 1 week when I was little, Dad got stopped 3 times for DWI, driving while Indian. But Reardon has one of the best small schools in the state, with a computer room and a huge chemistry lab, and a drama club, and 2 basketball gyms. The kids in Reardon are the smartest and most athletic kids anywhere. They are the best. I want to go to Reardon, I said. I couldn't believe what I was saying. For me, it seemed as real as saying, I want to go to the moon. Are you sure, my parents asked? Yes, I said. When do you want to go, my parents asked. Right now, I said. Tomorrow. Are you sure, my parents asked? Could you maybe wait until the semester break or until next year, get a fresh start? No, if I don't go now, I never will. I have to do it now. Okay, they said. Yep, it was that easy with my parents. It was almost like they'd been waiting for me to ask them if I could go to Reardon, like they were psychics or something. I mean, they've always known that I'm weird and ambitious, so maybe they expect me to do the weirdest things possible. And going to Reardon is truly a strange idea. But it isn't weird that my parents were so quickly agreed with my plans. They want a better life for my sister and me. My sister is running away to get lost, but I am running away because I want to find something. And my parents love me so much that they want to help me. Yeah, Dad is a drunk, and Mom is an ex-drunk, but they don't want their kids to be drunks. It's going to be hard to get you to Reardon, Dad said. We can't afford to move there, and there ain't no school bus going to come out here. You'll be the first one to ever leave the reservation this way, Mom said. The Indians around here are going to be angry with you. Shoot, I figured my fellow tribal members were going to torture me. And it has a nice little illustration by the illustrator of what he thought that would be like. But
I'm just going to read a poem by Shel Silverstein. So he was banned in some schools because he basically just promotes disobeying your parents and also getting spoiled, basically. Okay, this is called Little Abigail and the Beautiful Pony. There was a girl named Abigail who was taking a drive through the country with her parents when she spied a beautiful, sad-eyed, gray and white pony. And next to it was a sign that said, "For sale, cheap." "Oh," said Abigail, "may I have that pony? May I please?" And her parents said, "No, you may not." And Abigail said, "But I must have that pony." And her parents said, "Well, you can't have that pony, but you can have a nice butter pecan ice cream cone when we get home." And Abigail said, "I don't want a butter pecan ice cream cone. I want that pony. I must have that pony." And her parents said, "Be quiet and stop nagging. You're not going to get that pony." And Abigail began to cry and said, "If I don't get that pony, I'll die." And her parents said, "You won't die. No child has ever died from not getting a pony." And Abigail felt so bad that when they got home, she went to bed, and she couldn't eat, and she couldn't sleep, and her heart was broken, and she did die, all because of a pony that her parents wouldn't buy. This is a good story to read to your folks when they won't buy you something you want.
is. This edition I have is Penguin Classics Deluxe Edition. The cover art is so awesome. It's great. I'm going to read the first little paragraph. Lord of the Flies remains as provocative today as when it was first published in 1954, igniting passionate debate with its startling, brutal portrait of human nature. William Golding's compelling story about a group of very ordinary small boys marooned on a coral island has been labeled a parable, an allegory, a myth, a morality tale, a parody, a political treatise, and even a vision of the apocalypse. But above all, it has earned its place as one of the indisputable classics of the 20th century for readers of any age. I will be reading, basically, this is a part when the boys on the island make a new tribe and they've just killed a pig and things go wrong. Let's see. There was a blink of bright light beyond the forest and the thunder exploded again so that a little end started to whine. Big drops of rain fell among them, making individual sounds when they struck. Going to be a storm, said Ralph, and you'll have rain like when we dropped here. Who's clever now? Where are your shelters? What are you going to do about that? The hunters were looking uneasily at the sky, flinching from the stroke of the drops. A wave of restlessness set the boys swaying and moving aimlessly. The flickering light became brighter, and the blows of the thunder were only just bearable. The little ones began to run about, screaming. Jack leapt onto the sand. Do our dance. Come on, dance. He ran stumbling through the thick sand to the open space of rock beyond fire. Between the flashes of lightning, the air was dark and terrible, and the boys followed him clamorously. Roger became the pig, grunting and charging at Jack, who sidestepped. The hunters took their spears, the cooks took spits, and the rest clubs of firewood. A circling movement developed and a chant. While Roger mimed the terror of the pig, the little ones ran and jumped on the outside of the circle. Piggy and Ralph, under the threat of the sky, found themselves eager to take a place in this demented but partly secure society. They were glad to touch the brown backs of the fence that hemmed in the terror and made it governable. Kill the beast, cut his throat, spill his blood. The movement became regular while the chant lost its first superficial excitement and began to beat like a steady pulse. Roger ceased to be a pig and became a hunter, so that the center of the ring yawned emptily. Some of the little ones started to ring on their own, and the complimentary circles went round and round as though repetition would achieve safety of itself. There was the throb and stamp of a single organism. The dark sky was shattered by a blue-white scar. An instant later, the noise was on them like the blow of a gigantic whip. The chant rose a tone in agony. Kill the beast, cut his throat, spill his blood. Now out of the terror rose another desire, thick, urgent, blind. Kill the beast, cut his throat, spill his blood. Again, the blue-white scar jagged above them, and the sulphurous explosion beat down. The little ones screamed and blundered about, fleeing from the edge of the forest, and one of them broke the ring of Biggins in his terror. Him! The circle became a horseshoe. A thing was crawling out of the forest. It came darkly, uncertainly. The shrill screaming that rose before the beast was like a pain. The beast stumbled into the horseshoe. Kill the beast, cut his throat, spill his blood. The blue-white scar was constant, the noise unendurable. Simon was crying out something about a dead man on a hill. Kill the beast, cut his throat, spill his blood, do him in. The sticks fell and the mouth of the new circle crunched and screamed. The beast was on its knees in the center, its arms folded over its face. It was crying out against the abominable noise, something about a body on the hill. The beast struggled forward, broke the ring, and fell over the steep edge of the rock to the sand by the water. At once the crowd surged after it, poured down the rock, leapt onto the beast, screamed, struck, bit, tore. There were no words and no movements but the tearing of teeth and claws. Then the clouds opened and let down the rain like a waterfall. The water bounded from the mountaintop, tore leaves and branches from the trees, poured like a cold shower over the struggling heap on the sand. Presently the heap broke up and figures staggered away. Only the beast lay still, a few yards from the sea. Even in the rain, they could see how small a beast it was, and already its blood was staining the sand. Now a great wind blew the rain sideways, cascading the water from the forest trees. On the mountaintop, the parachute filled and moved. The figure slid, rose to its feet, spun, swayed down through a vastness of wet air, and trod with ungainly feet the tops of the high trees. Falling, still falling. It sank toward the beach, and the boys rushed, screaming, into the darkness. The parachute took the figure forward, furrowing the lagoon, and bumped it over the reef and out to sea. Toward midnight, the rain ceased and the clouds drifted away, so that the sky was scattered once more with the incredible lamps of stars. Then the breeze died too, and there was no noise save the drip and trickle of water that ran out of clefts and spilled down, leaf by leaf, to the brown earth of the island. The air was cool, moist, and clear, and presently even the sound of the water was still. The beast lay huddled on the pale beach, and the stains spread inch by inch. The edge of the lagoon became a streak of phosphorescence which advanced minutely as the great wave of the tide flowed. The clear water mirrored the clear sky and the angular, bright constellations. The line of phosphorescence bulged about the sand grains and little pebbles. It held them each in a dimple of tension, then suddenly accepted them with an inaudible syllable and moved on. Along the shoreward edge of the shallows, the advancing clearness was full of strange, moonbeam-bodied creatures with fiery eyes. Here and there, a larger pebble clung to its own air and was covered with a coat of pearls. The tide swelled in and over the rain-pitted sand and smoothed everything with a layer of silver. Now it touched the first of the stains that seeped from the broken body, and the creatures made a moving patch of light as they gathered at the edge. The water rose farther and dressed Simon's coarse hair with brightness. The line of his cheeks silvered, and the turn of his shoulder became sculptured marble. The strange attendant creatures, with their fiery eyes and trailing vapors, busied themselves round his head. The body lifted a fraction of an inch from the sand, and a bauble of air escaped from the mouth with a wet plop. Then it turned gently in the water. Somewhere over the darkened curve of the world, the sun and the moon were pulling, and the film of water on the earth planet was held, bulging slightly on one side while the solid core turned. The great wave of the tide moved farther along the island, and the water lifted. Softly, surrounded by a fringe of inquisitive bright creatures, itself a silver shape beneath the steadfast constellations, Simon's dead body moved out toward the open sea.
Find your page.
Okay. Yes. So I'm going to read a little bit On the Origin of Species by Charles Darwin. It has been banned historically because it challenges a religious view of creation. When on board HMS Beagle as a naturalist, I was much struck with certain facts in the distribution of inhabitants of South America and in the geological relations of the present to the past inhabitants of that continent. These facts seem to me to throw some light on the origin of species, that mystery of mysteries, as it has been called by one of our greatest philosophers. On my return home, it occurred to me in 1837 that something might perhaps be made out on this question by patiently accumulating and reflecting on all sorts of facts which could possibly have any bearing on it. After 5 years' work, I allowed myself to speculate on the subject and drew up some short notes. These I enlarged in 1844 into a sketch of the conclusions, and then seemed to me which then seemed to me probable. From that period to the present day, I have steadily pursued the same object. I hope that I may be excused for entering on these personal details, as I give them to show that I have not been hasty into coming to this decision. My work is now nearly finished, but it will take me 2 or 3 more years to complete it, as my health is far from strong. I have been urged to publish this abstract. I have more especially been induced to do this, as Mr. Wallace, who is now studying the natural history of the Malay archipelago, has arrived at almost the exact same conclusions that I have on the origin of species. Last year, he sent me a memoir on this subject with a request that I would forward it to Sir Charles Lyell, who sent it to the Linnaean Society, and it is published in the 3rd volume of the journal of that society. Sir C. Lyell and Dr. Hooker, who both know of my work, the latter having read my sketch in 1844, honored me by thinking it advisable to publish, with Mr. Wallace's excellent memoir, some brief extracts from my manuscript. This abstract, which I now publish, must necessarily be imperfect. I cannot here give references and authorities for my several statements. I must trust to the reader reposing some confidence in my accuracy. No doubt errors will have crept in, though I hope I have always been cautious in trusting to good authorities alone. I can here give only the general conclusions at which I have arrived, with few facts in illustration, but which I hope in most cases will suffice. No one can feel more sensible than I do of the necessity of hereafter publishing in the details of all the facts, with references, on which my conclusions have been grounded, and I hope in a future work to do this, for I am well aware that scarcely a single point is discussed in this volume on which facts cannot be adduced, and apparently leading to conclusions directly opposite to those at which I have arrived. A fair result can be obtained only by fully stating and balancing the facts and the arguments on both sides of each question, and this cannot possibly here be done. I regret that want of space prevents me from the satisfaction of acknowledging the generous assistance which I have received from many naturalists, some of them personally unknown to me. I cannot, however, let this opportunity pass without expressing my deep obligations to Dr. Hooker, who has for the last 15 years aided me in every possible way by his large stores of knowledge and his excellent judgment. In considering the origin of species, it is quite conceivable that a naturalist, reflecting on the minimal affinities of organic beings, on their embryological relations, on their geographical distributions, geological successions, and other such facts, might come to the conclusion that each species has not been independently created, but had descended, like varieties, from other species. Nevertheless, such a conclusion, even if well-founded, would be unsatisfactory until it could be shown how the innumerable species inhabiting this world have been modified so as to acquire the perfection of structure and co-adaptation which most justly excites our admiration. Naturalists continually to refer to external conditions such as climate, food, etc. as the only possible cause of variation. In one very limited sense, as we shall hereafter see, this may be true, but it's preposterous to attribute to mere external conditions, the structure, for instance, of the woodpecker with its feet, tail, beak, and tongue, so admirably adapted to catch insects under the bark of trees. In the case of the mistletoe, which draws its nourishment from certain trees, which has seeds that must be transported by certain birds, and which has flowers that must be transported by certain birds, and which has flowers which, with separate sexes, absolutely requiring the agency of certain insects to bring pollen from one flower to another. It is equally preposterous to account for the structure of this parasite with its relation to several distinct organic beings by the effects of external conditions, or of habit, or of the volition of the plants itself. I think now I want to skip ahead and just read the final paragraph, which I find poetic almost, of his On the Origin of Species. It is interesting to contemplate an entangled bank, clothed with many plants of many kinds, with birds singing on the bushes, with various insects flitting about, and with the worms crawling through the damp earth, and to reflect that these elaborately constructed forms, so different from each other and dependent on each other in so complex a manner, have all been produced by laws acting around us. These laws, taken in the largest sense, being growth and reproduction, inheritance, which is almost always implied by reproduction, variability from the indirect and direct action of external conditions of life, and from use and disuse, a ratio of increase so high as to lead to a struggle for life, and as a consequence to natural selection, entailing divergence of character and the extinction of less improved forms. Thus, from the war of nature, from famine and death, the most exalted object which we are capable of conceiving, namely the production of the higher animals, directly follows. There is a grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers, having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one, and that, whilst this planet has gone on cycling according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. That's Darwin.
Thank you, Shay, for being a last-minute reader.
I'm just going to read the first chapter in the apology. August 25th, 1991. Dear friend, I am writing to you because she said she said you listen and understand and didn't try to sleep with that person at the party even though you could have. Please don't try to figure out who she is because then you might figure out who I am. And I really don't want you to do that. I will call people by different names or generic names because I don't want you to find me. I didn't enclose a return address for the same reason. I mean nothing bad by this, honest. I just need to know that someone out there listens and understands and doesn't try to sleep with people even if they could have. I need to know that these people exist. I think you of all people would understand that because I think you of all people are alive and appreciate what that means. At least I hope you do because other people look to you for strength and friendship, and that's simple. At least that's what I've heard. So this is my life, and I want you to know that I am both happy and sad and still trying to figure out how that could be. I try to think of my family as a reason for me being this way, especially after my friend Michael stopped going to school one day last spring and we heard Mr. Vaughn's voice in the loudspeaker. Boys and girls, I regret to inform you that one of our students has passed. We will hold a memorial service for Michael Dobson during assembly this Friday. I don't know how news travels around school and why it is very often right. Maybe it was in the lunchroom. It's hard to remember. But Dave with the aqua glasses told us that Michael killed himself. His mom played bridge with one of Michael's neighbors and they heard the gunshot. I really don't remember much of what happened after that except my older brother came to Mr. Vaughn's office in my middle school and told me to stop crying. Then he put his arm on my shoulder and told me to get out of my system before Dad came home. We then went to eat french fries at McDonald's and he taught me how to play pinball. He even made a joke that because of me, he got to skipped an afternoon of school to ask me if I wanted to help him work on his Camaro. I guess I was pretty messy because he never let me work on his Camaro before. At the guidance council sessions, they asked a few of us who acted like Michael to say a few words. I think they were afraid that some of us would try to kill ourselves or something because they looked very tense and one of them kept touching his beard. Bridget, who was crazy, said that sometimes she thought about suicide when commercials came on during TV. She was sincere, and this puzzled with the guidance counselors. Carl, who was nice to everyone, said that he felt very sad, but he never killed himself because it was a sin. This one guidance counselor went through the whole group and finally came to me. What do you think, Charlie? What was so strange about this was the fact that I had never met this man because he was a specialist. And he knew my name even though I wasn't wearing a name tag like they do in open house. Well, I think that Michael was a nice guy, and I don't understand why he did it. As much as I feel sad, I think that not knowing is what really bothers me. I just reread that, and it doesn't sound like how I talk, especially in the office because I was crying still. I never did stop crying. The counselor said that he suspected that Michael had problems at home and didn't feel like he had anyone to talk to. That's maybe why he felt all alone and killed himself. Then I started screaming at the guidance counselor that Michael could have talked to me, and I started crying even harder. He tried to calm me down by saying that he meant an adult like a teacher or a guidance counselor, but it didn't work, and eventually my brother came by the middle school in his Camaro to pick me up. For the rest of the school year, the teacher treated me differently and gave me better grades, even though I didn't get any smarter. To tell you the truth, I think I made them all nervous. Michael's funeral was strange because his father didn't cry, and 3 months later, he left Michael's mom. At least according to Dave at lunchtime, I think about it sometimes. I wonder what went on in Michael's house around dinner and TV shows. Michael never left a note, or at least his parents didn't let anyone see it. Maybe it was problems at home. I wish I knew. It might make me miss him more clearly. It might have made sad sense. One thing I do know is that it makes me wonder if I have problems at home, but it seems to me that a lot of other people have it a lot worse. Like when my sister's first boyfriend started going around with another girl and my sister cried for the whole weekend. My dad said, there are other people who have it a lot worse, and my mom was quiet, and that was that. A month later, my sister met another boy and started playing happy records again. My dad kept working, my mom kept sleeping, my brother kept fixing his career. This until he left for college at the beginning of summer. He's playing football for Penn State, but he needed the summer to get his grades right to play football. I don't think that they're the favorite kid in our family. There are three of us, and I'm the youngest. My brother's the oldest, and he is a very good football player and likes cars. My sister is very pretty and mean to boys. She's in the middle. I get straight A's now like my sister, and that is why they leave me alone. My mom cries a lot during TV programs. My dad works a lot and is an honest man. My Aunt Helen used to say that my dad was going to be too proud to have a midlife crisis. It took me until around now to understand what she meant by that because he just turned 40 and nothing has changed. My Aunt Helen was my favorite person in the world. She was my mom's sister. She got straight A's when she was a teenager and used to give me books to read. My father said that the books were a little too old for me, but I liked them, so he just shrugged and let me read. My Aunt Helen lived with my family for the last few years of her life because something very bad happened to her. Nobody would tell me what happened even though I always wanted to know. And when I was 7, I stopped asking about it because I kept asking like kids always do, and my Aunt Helen started crying very hard. That's when my dad stopped me saying, "You're hurting your Aunt Helen's feelings." I didn't want to do that, so I stopped. Aunt Helen told my father not to hit me in front of her ever again. And my father said this was his house and he could do what he wanted. And my mom was quiet, and so were my brother and sister. I don't remember much more than that because I started crying really hard. And after a while, my dad had my mom take me to my room. It wasn't so much later that my mom had a few glasses of white wine and told me what happened to her sister. Some people really do have it a lot worse than I do. They really do. I should probably go to sleep now. It's very late. I don't know why I wrote a lot of this down for you to read. The reason I wrote this letter is because I start high school tomorrow, and I'm really afraid of going. Love always, Charlie. And I'm gonna go ahead and skip to the Luigi. August 23rd, 1992. Dear friend, I've been in the hospital for the past 2 months. They just released me yesterday. The doctor told me that my mother and my father found me sitting on the couch in the family living room. I was completely naked just watching the television, which wasn't on. I wouldn't speak or snap out of it, they said. My father even slapped me to wake me up, and like I told you, he never hits. But it didn't work. So they brought me to the hospital where I stayed when I was 7 after my Aunt Helen died. They told me I didn't speak or didn't acknowledge anyone for a week, not even Patrick, who I guess visited me during that time. It's scary to think about. All I remember is putting the letter in the mailbox. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in a doctor's office. And I remembered my Aunt Helen, and I started to cry. The doctor, who turned out to be a very nice woman, started to ask me questions, which I answered. But I don't really want to talk about the questions and the answers. But I kind of figured out everything I dreamt about my Aunt Helen was true. After a while, I realized that it happened every Saturday when we watched television. The first few weeks in the hospital were very hard. The hardest part was sitting in the doctor's office when the doctor told my mom and dad what happened. I have never seen my mother cry so much or my father look so angry because I didn't know what was happening when it was. But the doctor has helped me work out a lot of things since then. About my Aunt Helen, about my family, and friends, and me. There were a lot of stages to these kinds of things. She was really great through all of them. The thing that helped me the most, though, was the time I could have visitors. My family, including my brother and sister, always came for those days until my brother had to go back to school to play football. After that, my family came without my brother, and my brother sent me cards. He even told me on his last card that he read my report on Walden and liked it a lot, which made me feel really good. Just like the first time I saw Patrick. The best thing about Patrick is that even when you're in a hospital, he doesn't change. He just cracks jokes to make you feel better instead of asking you questions about feeling worse. He even brought me a letter from Sam, and Sam said she was coming back at the end of August. If I got better by then, she and Patrick would drive me through the tunnel. And this time I could stand in the back of the pickup truck if I wanted to. Things like that helped me more than anything. The days when I received the mail were good too. My grandfather sent me a really nice letter. So did my great aunt. So did my grandma and great uncle Phil. My aunt Rebecca even sent me flowers with a card that was signed by all my Ohio cousins. It was nice to know that they were thinking about me, just like it was nice. It was nice the time Patrick brought Mary Elizabeth and Alex and Bob and everyone for a visit, including Peter and Craig. I guess they're friends again, and I was glad they were. Just like I was glad that Mary Elizabeth did most of the talking, because it made things feel more normal. Mary Elizabeth even stayed a little later than others. I was so happy to have a chance to talk with her alone before she left for Berkeley. And just like I was happy for Bill and his girlfriend when they came to see me 2 weeks ago. They're getting married this November and they want me to go to their wedding. It's nice to have things to look forward to. This time I feel like everything was going to be alright was the time when my sisters and my brother stayed after my parents had left. This was sometime in July. They asked me a lot of questions about Aunt Helen because I guess nothing had ever happened to them. My brother looked really sad, and my sister looked really mad. It was that time when things started to get clearer because there was nobody to hate anymore after that. What I mean is that I looked at my brother and sister and I thought maybe that they would be an aunt and uncle, just like I would be an uncle. Just look at my mother and Aunt Helen were sisters. And we could all sit around and wonder and feel bad about each other and blame a lot of people for what they did or didn't do or what they didn't know. I don't know. I guess there could always be someone to blame. Maybe if my grandfather didn't hit her, my mom wouldn't be so quiet. And maybe she wouldn't have married my dad because he doesn't hit. And maybe I would never have been born. But I am very glad to have been born. So I don't know what to say about it all, especially since my mom seems happy with her life, and I don't know what else there is to want. It's like if I blamed my Aunt Helen, I would have to blame her dad for hitting her and the friend of the family that fooled around with her when she was little, the person that fooled around with him, and God for not stopping all this and things that are much worse. I did do that for a while, but then I just couldn't anymore because it wasn't going anywhere, because it wasn't the point. I'm not the way I am because of what I dreamt and remembered of my Aunt Helen. That's what I figured about when things got quiet. I think it's important, very important to know. It made things feel clear and together. Don't get me wrong, I know what happened was important and I needed to remember it. But it's like when my doctor told me the story of these two brothers whose dad was a bad alcoholic. One brother grew up to be a successful carpenter who never drank. The other brother ended up being a drinker as bad as his dad was. When they asked the first brother why he didn't drink, he said that after he saw what it did to his father, he could never bring himself to even try it. When they asked the other brother, he said that he guessed he learned how to drink on his father's knee. So I guess we are who we are for a lot of reasons, and maybe we'll never know most of them. But even if we don't have the power to choose where we came from, we can still choose where we go from there. We can still do things, and we can try to feel okay about them. I think that if I ever have kids and they're upset, I won't tell them that people are starving in China or anything like that, because it wouldn't change the fact that they were upset. And if somebody else had it much worse, that doesn't really change the fact that you have good and bad. Just like what my sister said when I had been in the hospital for a while. She said that she was really worried about going to college, and considering I was going through, she felt really dumb about it, but I don't know why she could feel dumb. I'd be worried too, and really, I don't think I have it any better or worse than she does. I don't know. It's just different. Maybe it's a good thing to put in perspective, but sometimes I think that the only perspective is to really be there. Like Sam said, because it's okay to feel things and be who you are about them. When I got released yesterday, my mom drove me home. It was in the afternoon. She asked me if I was hungry, and I said yes. Then she asked me what I wanted, and I told her I wanted to go to McDonald's like we did when I was little and got sick and stayed home from school. So we went there, and it was nice to be with my mom and eat french fries. And later that night, to be with my family at dinner time and have things just like they always were. the amazing part, that was the amazing part. Things just keep going. We didn't talk about anything heavy or light. We were just there together, and that was enough. So today, my father went to work. My mother took my sister and me out to take care of last minute things for my sister since she was leaving for college in a few days. When I got back, I called Patrick's house because he said that Sam should be home by then. Sam answered the phone. It was so nice to hear her voice. Later, they came by in Sam's pickup truck, and we went to the big boy just like we always did. Sam told us about her life at school, which sounded very exciting, and I told her about my life in the hospital, which didn't. And Patrick made jokes to keep everyone honest. After we left, we got in Sam's pickup truck, and just like Sam promised, we drove to the tunnel. About half a mile from the tunnel, Sam stopped the car, and I climbed in the back. Patrick played the radio really loud so I could hear it, and as we were approaching the tunnel, I listened to the music and thought about all the things that people had said to me over the past year. I thought about Bill telling me I was special, and my sister saying she loved me, and my mom too, and even my dad and my brother when I was in the hospital. I thought about Patrick calling me his friend, and I thought about Sam telling me to do things, to really be there. And I just thought about how great it was to have friends and family. As we went into the tunnel, I didn't hold up my arms like I was flying. I just let the wind brush over my face, and I started crying and smiling at the same time. Because I couldn't help feeling just how much I love my Aunt Helen for buying me 2 presents, and how much I wanted the present I bought my mom for my birthday to be really special. And how much I wanted my sister, my brother, and Sam, and Patrick, and everyone else to be happy. But mostly I was crying because I was suddenly very aware of the fact that it was me standing up in that tunnel with the wind over my face. Not caring if I saw downtown, not even thinking about it. Because I was standing in the tunnel and I was really there. And that was enough to make me feel infinite. Tomorrow I start my sophomore year of high school. And believe it or not, I'm really not that afraid of it I'm really not that afraid of going. I'm not sure if I will have the time to write any more letters because I might be too busy trying to participate. So if this does end up being my last letter, please believe that things are good with me. Even when they're not, they will be soon enough. I will believe the same about you. Love always, Charlie.
We get a children's book. If you want to jump around.
I don't know about that. Okay, so I'm reading A Day in the Life of Marlon Bundo, which is actually number 2 on the top 10 challenge books of 2018. And just for some background context, Marlon Bundo is a real bunny, based on a real bunny, that's owned by our current Vice President, Mike Pence. And he also wrote a book called Marlon Bundo's A Day in the Life of the Vice President. John Oliver from Last Week Tonight did a story on Mike Pence, and at the end he announced that he was releasing this book, which does feature Marlon Bundo marrying another bunny, a boy bunny named Wesley, basically because of Mike Pence's view on LGBTQ the community. So it's been banned because of the LGBTQ content, politics, and religion. So I will skip to the middle here. And we do have this at the library, so you should definitely check that out because it's really cute. This story time style. Boy bunnies don't marry boy bunnies, said the stink bug. This is he bears a striking resemblance to boy bunnies have to marry girl bunnies. But this is the bunny I love, said Wesley. And this is the bunny I love, said Marlon Bundo. Just being next to Wesley made him feel a little braver. Too bad, said the stink bug. I am the stinkiest and I am important. I am the stinkiest and I am in charge. Boy bunnies marry girl bunnies. Girl bunnies marry boy bunnies. This is the way it has always been. You are different, and different is bad. The other animals started whispering nervously amongst themselves. Pumpernickel, who is a badger, came forward. I am different too, he said.
I eat my sandwich crust first. I'm different too, said Dill Prickle, who is a hedgehog. Great name. You ever get a hedgehog? I read the ends of books before I read the beginnings, just to make sure they're not too sad for me. Anybody else do that? Read the ends? No? It's okay. I am different too, said Mr. Paws, who is a very good dog. Sometimes I sniff butts and I don't know why. Everyone is different, and different is not bad, said Scooter, who is a turtle. Different is special. So I'm going to skip ahead a little. Let the animals decide that they can vote for who is in charge. And so their choices are the stink bug or not the stink bug. You can maybe guess who wins. Stink bug won, not the stink bug, everybody else. So he's booted out. So then... So Wesley and I got married. We had 2 handsome groom otters named Muffins and Cubby, and Flower Mouse named Hiccup. We ate and we drank and we danced the hokey pokey. Dill Prickle was especially good. And the ceremony was performed by a cat named Pajama, why not, who brought her wife as her date. After we ate and drank and danced and went home, we went home together and carried him over the threshold. Aww. We have to get some sleep, Marlin. Tomorrow we leave on our bunny moon. Watching a little B&N, some wolf blitzer there. A wolf blitzer. Oh, that's great. Because it doesn't matter if you love a girl bunny or a boy bunny, or eat your sandwich backward or forward. Stink bugs are temporary, but love is forever. The end.
So that is our last but not least.